I hired a guy to mow the lawn while my daughter was away because the grass was getting high enough to hide a body. About an hour later, he called me, his voice trembling so hard I could barely understand him. "Sir, is anyone else in the house right now?" I asked him what he meant. He whispered, "I hear crying from your basement. And sir, that is not a TV, it's calling your name." Before I tell you what I found down there, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people who are supposed to love you. My name is Harold Keaton, though everyone calls me Harry. I am 68 years old, a retired structural engineer, and until 3 days ago, I thought I was just an old man living out his final years in the guest room of the house I paid for. I was wrong. I was living on top of a crime scene. It started at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles from my home in Seattle, nursing a lukewarm black coffee I didn't even want. My daughter Vanessa had practically pushed me out the door that morning. She told me she needed the house empty to do a deep clean, that my shuffling around was getting in the way of her organizing. She put a $20 bill in my shirt pocket like I was a child and told me not to come back until 5 o'clock. I sat there watching the rain streak against the glass, feeling that familiar mixture of humiliation and gratitude. I told myself I should be thankful. After my wife died, Vanessa and her husband Todd moved in to take care of me. That's what they told the neighbors anyway. In reality, Todd had gambled away their condo, and Vanessa hadn't sold a house in 6 months. They needed my roof, not the other way around. But I played the part. I played the confused, slightly deaf old man because it was easier than fighting. Then my phone buzzed on the table. It was Luis, the young man I hired to handle the landscaping since my back gave out last year. I hesitated. Vanessa hated when I spent money on Luis. She said Todd could mow the lawn, but Todd hadn't lifted a finger in this house since he moved in. I answered, expecting Luis to ask about payment. "Mr. Keaton," Luis said, and the terror in his voice made me sit up straight. "You need to come home, right now." I asked him what was wrong. I thought maybe he had broken a window or cut a sprinkler line. "No, sir," he whispered. "I was trimming the bushes near the back foundation, the ones by the ventilation grate. I turned off the trimmer to check the line and I heard it. Heard what Louisa woman, Mr. Keaton. She is crying. She is scratching at the metal grate from the inside. She kept saying Harry over and over again. Sir, I am scared. I am going to call 911. Do not call the police, I ordered him, my voice dropping to a low growl that I hadn't used since my days managing construction sites. Luis, listen to me. Do not call 911. If you call them, the people inside might hurt her before the police even get through the door. I am 5 minutes away. Wait for me by the rose bushes. I will pay you double for your silence. I hung up and ran to my truck. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The basement. It had been off limits to me for 3 months. Vanessa had changed the locks on the heavy oak door leading downstairs. She told me there was a toxic mold infestation, black mold, that was dangerous for seniors with weak lungs. She said they were treating it with chemicals and that I was strictly forbidden from going down there for my own safety. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. I drove through the rainy streets of Seattle running 2 red lights. The image of the basement door with its shiny new deadbolt flashed in my mind. Toxic mold doesn't cry. Mold doesn't call my name. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked normal. It was a sprawling craftsman I had bought 30 years ago, a sturdy home built on a solid foundation. But now it felt like a facade. Vanessa's car and Todd's SUV were gone. They had told me they were driving to a client meeting in Bellevue and wouldn't be back until dinner. I found Luis standing behind the oversized rhododendrons in the backyard. He was pale, his landscaping gloves clutching a pair of shears like a weapon. Mr. Keaton, he said, shaking his head. I don't want to be here. This is bad. Show me, I said. He led me to the side of the house where the concrete foundation met the earth. There was a small ventilation window there, ground level. I knelt down, the wet grass soaking through my trousers. I expected to see through the glass into the storage room where I used to keep my old drafting tables, but the glass was black. Someone had painted it over from the inside. Thick, opaque black paint. I put my ear against the glass. Silence. "It stopped about 2 minutes ago," Luis whispered. "But look at the vent." Next to the window was a small metal grate for air circulation. I squinted at it. It was rusted old. But there, wedged in the corner of the metal slats, was something that made my stomach turn over. It was a fingernail. A broken, jagged human fingernail. And around the metal edge there were scratches. Not rusted flakes, but fresh, frantic scratches where paint and metal had been clawed away by human fingers. There was a smear of something dark and dried. Blood. This wasn't mold. This was a prison. My mind raced back to 6 months ago. Aunt Clara, my wife's older sister. She was 74, a bit eccentric but wealthy. She lived 3 towns over. Vanessa told me Clara had started to lose her mind, that she was forgetting names, leaving the stove on. Vanessa said she handled it. She said she found a beautiful high-end memory care facility in Arizona for Clara. She showed me the brochure. She even showed me photos of Clara enjoying the sun. I hadn't spoken to Clara in 6 months. Vanessa said Clara's doctors recommended no contact for the first few months to help her settle in. I had trusted my daughter. I had trusted her while she painted my basement windows black. I stood up, my knees cracking. I pulled my wallet out and handed Luis $500. "Luis, go home," I said. My voice steady despite the horror rising in my throat. "You saw nothing. You heard nothing. If my son-in-law sees you here, he will ask questions. I will handle this. But sir, that woman, I will get her out, Luis. But I need you to disappear right now." He took the money, looked at the blacked-out window one last time, and ran to his truck. I was alone. I walked to the back door. Locked. I used my key and entered the kitchen. It was silent. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the potpourri Vanessa insisted on keeping in every room. I walked to the basement door in the hallway. I tried the handle. Locked. I knelt down and looked at the keyhole. It was a high-security deadbolt, the kind I used to spec for commercial buildings. I needed to get in there. I considered kicking it down. I was old, but I was big, and I knew how to use leverage. But then I heard the sound of a car engine in the driveway. They were back. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was only 2:45. They weren't supposed to be home for hours. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. If they found me trying to break down the basement door, and if Clara was really down there, they would know I knew. And if they were capable of locking an old woman in a dungeon, what would they do to me? I ran to the living room. I threw myself onto the recliner, grabbed the TV remote, and turned on a rerun of a fishing show. I cranked the volume up to level 50. I let my mouth hang open slightly, my head lolling to the side, assuming the posture of the napping, useless old man they thought I was. The front door opened. I heard Todd's heavy boots and the clicking of Vanessa's heels. "Why is the TV so loud?" Vanessa's voice cut through the noise. She sounded annoyed, sharp. I didn't move. I waited until she was right in front of me before I jerked awake, feigning surprise. "Huh. Oh, Vanessa!" "You're back early," I shouted, pretending I hadn't realized the volume was up. She grabbed the remote and muted the TV. She looked at me with eyes that were cold, calculating. "Dad, why are you here? I told you to stay out until 5 o'clock. I haven't finished the floors." "I finished my coffee," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "And my hip was hurting. I just wanted to sit down." "I didn't think you'd mind." Todd walked in from the kitchen. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with a face that always looked sweaty. He was holding his phone, staring at it. "Babe, check the notification," Todd said. Vanessa pulled out her phone. My blood ran cold. I had forgotten. Last week, Todd installed security cameras around the perimeter of the house. He said it was to keep me safe, to make sure I didn't wander off. Vanessa swiped on her screen. Her eyes narrowed. "Dad, why were you in the backyard 10 minutes ago?" she asked. Her voice was calm, dangerously calm. What? I cupped my ear, leaning forward. "The backyard, Harold. You were by the rose bushes. Who were you talking to?" My mind raced. I needed a lie. A simple, pathetic lie that fit their narrative of me. "Oh, the lawn boy," I said, waving my hand dismissively. I thought he missed a spot. I went out to yell at him, but then I realized it was just a shadow. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I gave him a tip and told him to go. Vanessa stared at me. She was looking for a crack in the mask. I held her gaze, blinking slowly, keeping my mouth slightly open. I was the architect who had designed skyscrapers in the 80s, but in that moment, I put all my intelligence into looking like a senile fool. Todd scoffed. "You tipped him great. There goes another $50 of our inheritance." Vanessa relaxed slightly. She put the phone away. "Fine. Just stay on the couch, Dad. We have things to do." She signaled to Todd. They went into the kitchen. I unmuted the TV but kept the volume low, just enough to cover the sound of my own breathing. I strained my ears. I have always had excellent hearing. The hearing aids I wore were real, but I didn't actually need them as much as I let on. I turned them up to maximum sensitivity. From the kitchen, I heard the click of the basement deadbolt. I shifted in my chair so I could see the reflection in the hallway mirror. Todd was opening the basement door. He was holding a plastic tray. On it was a paper plate with what looked like leftover meatloaf and a plastic cup of water. He disappeared into the darkness of the stairwell. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. He was down there for less than 2 minutes. When he came back up, the tray was empty. He locked the door, the heavy bolt sliding home with a sound that felt like a gunshot. He walked back to Vanessa, who was standing by the refrigerator. "Is she eating?" Vanessa whispered. "Yeah," Todd muttered. He wiped his hands on his jeans as if he had touched something filthy. "But she's getting loud again, Ness. I heard her scratching when I opened the door. That lawn kid might have heard something." "He didn't hear anything. Dad said he was just complaining about the grass," Vanessa hissed. "But you're right. We can't risk it. The neighbors are nosy." Todd leaned in closer to her. "The dosage isn't holding her under long enough. She's fighting it." "Then up it," Vanessa said. Her voice was devoid of any emotion. "Just do it tonight. Put 3 crushed pills in her water instead of 2. We just need her quiet until Friday. Once the wire transfer clears from her account, we can finalize things. Finalize things." I stared at the TV screen, watching a fisherman reel in a marlin, but I saw nothing. My hands were gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles were white. They were drugging Aunt Clara. They were keeping her in a dungeon below my feet. And come Friday, they were going to kill her. I realized then that my house wasn't just a prison. It was a waiting room for death. And if they were willing to do this to Clara for her money, what was their plan for me? I needed to get into that basement. But I didn't have a key, and breaking the door down would get us both killed. I needed a way in that they wouldn't see. I closed my eyes and visualized the blueprints of this house. I drew them myself 30 years ago. I knew every beam, every pipe, every void in the walls, and I remembered something. Behind the kitchen cabinetry, there was an old laundry chute we had sealed up in the 90s during a remodel. It ran directly from the kitchen pantry down to the utility room in the basement. It was small, too small for a person, but big enough for a camera. I waited until night fell. I waited until I heard the heavy rhythmic snoring of my son-in-law from the master bedroom upstairs. I stood up from my bed in the guest room. I didn't turn on the lights. I moved through the darkness of the house I built, no longer the old man they thought they owned. I walked to the kitchen, opened my tool bag, which I had hidden under the sink, and pulled out my old fiber optic inspection camera. It was time to see what was happening in hell. The house was breathing. That is the only way I can describe the silence at 3:00 a.m. It was a heavy, rhythmic silence punctuated by the settling of timber and the distant, wet snoring of my son-in-law from the master suite upstairs. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, fully dressed, my boots laced tight. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fingernail wedged in the vent grate. I needed to move, but I had to move like a ghost. I grabbed my tool bag, the heavy canvas muffled against my leg, and crept into the hallway. The floorboards outside the bathroom always creaked, a flaw in the subflooring I had meant to fix 20 years ago. I stepped over the spot by muscle memory. I was not just an old man sneaking around. I was the architect of this prison. I knew its bones better than the people holding the keys. The kitchen was bathed in the pale, sickly light of the microwave clock. I set my bag down on the linoleum and looked at the wall behind the refrigerator. Vanessa and Todd thought the house ended at the drywall. They saw surfaces. I saw voids. In 1990, during a remodel, we had sealed off an old laundry chute that ran from the kitchen pantry directly down to the utility room in the basement. It wasn't a straight drop. It angled sharply behind the cabinetry to avoid a load-bearing beam. We had covered the opening with a false back in the pantry cabinet. To anyone else, it was just a shelf for canned soup. To me, it was a back door. I opened the pantry door. It squeaked. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs, waiting for the sound of footsteps upstairs. Silence. Just the hum of the fridge. I cleared the cans of expired pumpkin puree and stale crackers my daughter hadn't touched in years. I ran my fingers along the back panel of the cabinet. There they were. 4 Phillips head screws painted over with layers of white latex paint. I pulled out my screwdriver. I couldn't use the power drill. The noise would wake the dead. I had to do this by hand. I pressed the tip into the first screw, applying just enough pressure to break the paint seal without stripping the head. My wrist ached. The arthritis I usually complained about was real enough, but adrenaline is a powerful painkiller. I turned. The screw groaned, a high-pitched squeal of metal on wood. I stopped, holding my breath. Nothing from upstairs. One by one, I removed the screws. My hands, usually shaky in front of Vanessa to sell the act, were steady as rock. I was back on the job site. I was solving a structural problem. The problem was a barrier, and the solution was removal. I pried the plywood panel loose. A smell hit me immediately. It was a draft of cold, damp air carrying the scent of mildew, unwashed bodies, and something sharp like ammonia. It was the smell of neglect. I uncoiled the fiber optic inspection camera. It was a long black snake with a small lens and an LED light at the tip connected to a handheld monitor. I fed the cable into the dark void of the old chute. It hit a snag about 3 feet down. I twisted the cable, maneuvering it past the rough framing. I watched the small screen in my hand. It was a kaleidoscope of dust bunnies and spider webs illuminated in the eerie green glow of the night vision mode. Feed, twist, push. I estimated I was about 8 feet down, just punching through the ceiling of the basement utility room. The camera head dangled free. I saw the concrete floor. I manipulated the controls, panning the lens to the left, toward the main open area of the basement where I used to have my workbench. The image on the screen was grainy like an old ultrasound, but what I saw made my knees give out. I had to grab the counter to keep from collapsing. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a cage. In the center of the room, exactly where my drafting table used to be, there was a filthy, stained mattress thrown directly onto the cold concrete. There were no sheets, just a heap of gray wool blankets. And there was a figure, It was Aunt Clara. But it wasn't the Clara I knew. The woman on the screen was a skeleton wrapped in loose skin. Her silver hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a matted bird's nest. She was sitting up, rocking back and forth, her lips moving in a silent, rhythmic prayer, or plea. I zoomed in. The camera resolution wasn't great, but it was enough to shatter my heart. Around her right ankle there was a heavy industrial chain. It was padlocked. The other end of the chain was looped around the main steel support column of the house, the very column I had calculated the load for 30 years ago to ensure this house would stand for a century. My son-in-law had turned the backbone of my home into a whipping post. There was a 5-gallon bucket within her reach. I didn't need high definition to know what it was for. Next to it was the plastic plate Todd had taken down earlier. She was picking at the cold meatloaf with her fingers, eating like a starving animal. A scream built up in my throat, a primal roar of rage that wanted to tear the house down beam by beam. I wanted to run upstairs, grab my old framing hammer and shatter Todd's kneecaps. I wanted to drag Vanessa out of her bed by her hair and force her to look at this screen. But I bit my lip. I bit it so hard I tasted copper. If I screamed, if I went up there now, I was an unarmed 70-year-old man against 2 desperate people who had already crossed the line into felony kidnapping and torture. They would kill me. They would kill Clara. And they would bury us both under the foundation before sunrise. I watched Clara on the tiny screen. She stopped eating. She looked up, her eyes scanning the ceiling, looking right at the vent where I knew Luis had heard her. She opened her mouth. "Harry," she mouthed. She didn't scream it. She didn't have the strength. She just formed the word. She wasn't senile. She wasn't crazy. She was trapped in hell, and she knew I was the only one who could pull her out. I pulled the camera back, my hands trembling now, not from age but from a fury so cold it burned. I coiled the wire. I replaced the panel. I screwed every screw back into its original, paint-filled groove. I wiped the dust from the floor. I went back to my room and sat in the dark. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. I looked at my hands. These hands had built skyscrapers. They had poured concrete and welded steel. And tomorrow they were going to dismantle my daughter's life piece by piece. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to plan. They thought they had buried us, but they forgot that I was the one who poured the foundation, and I knew exactly how to break it. The sun came up at 6:15, painting the kitchen in a deceptive, cheerful yellow light that made the stainless steel appliances gleam. I sat at the breakfast island, my hands folded on the granite countertop, watching my daughter prepare my execution cocktail. She called it my morning regimen. I called it a chemical leash. Vanessa stood by the sink, her back to me, popping the safety caps off 3 different orange prescription bottles. The sound was rhythmic and distinct. Pop, rattle, pop, rattle. She turned around with a glass of water and a small paper cup containing 2 white tablets and a blue capsule. "Here you go, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she was trying to manipulate me. "Dr. Sterling called in a new vitamin supplement for your joints. He said it will help with that hip pain you were complaining about yesterday." I looked at the blue pill. It wasn't a vitamin. I had built hospitals. I knew what heavy sedatives looked like. It was a benzodiazepine strong enough to knock out a horse or keep an inquisitive old man asleep while his family finalized a murder. I reached out, making sure my hand trembled just enough to spill a little water. I saw the flash of irritation in Vanessa's eyes before she smoothed it over. "Oops, let me help you," she said. "I can do it," I muttered, playing the stubborn senior. I tossed the pills into my mouth. But I didn't swallow. I slid them into the pocket between my cheek and my gum, a trick I learned from a documentary about prison life I watched 3 years ago. I took a large gulp of water, exaggerating the swallowing motion, my Adam's apple bobbing. She watched me. She actually waited until I opened my mouth to say thank you before she turned away. She was thorough. I had to give her that. As soon as she went to the foyer to grab her purse, I spit the dissolving bitter mess into my napkin and shoved it deep into my pocket. Todd came thundering down the stairs, adjusting a tie that looked like a noose around his thick neck. He was sweating already. "We have to go, Ness," he said, checking his watch. "The lawyer said 9 o'clock sharp. If we want to get that expedited power of attorney, we can't be late." Power of attorney? They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They thought I was deaf, drugged, and helpless. "We will be back in 2 hours, Dad," Vanessa shouted from the doorway, ensuring I heard her. "You just rest. Let those vitamins kick in. Don't wait up." The door slammed. I moved to the window and watched them back out of the driveway. I waited until their SUV turned the corner at the end of the block. Then I looked at the microwave clock. 8:45 a.m. I had 120 minutes. I didn't run. I moved with purpose. I went straight to the garage. My workshop was there, dusty and neglected since Todd had piled his boxes of unsold exercise equipment in front of my bench. I shoved the boxes aside, ignoring the pain in my lower back. I needed my angle grinder. I found it under a tarp, the cord frayed but intact. I grabbed a cutting wheel designed for hardened steel. I walked to the basement door in the hallway. The deadbolt was new, heavy-duty brass. Picking it would take too long, and I didn't have the tools. Kicking it in would shatter the frame, leaving evidence I couldn't hide. They needed to come home to a locked door. They needed to think nothing had happened. I looked at the hinges. They were on the outside of the door, a rookie mistake by my son-in-law. When you install a security door to keep someone in, you put the hinges on the inside. But Todd was lazy. I plugged in the grinder. The noise was going to be deafening, a high-pitched shriek that would alert anyone within 100 yards. But I had no choice. I put on my safety glasses, took a deep breath, and pressed the trigger. The grinder screamed. Sparks showered onto the hardwood floor, scorching the varnish. I didn't care. I pressed the blade into the top hinge pin. Metal groaned and yielded. I cut the head off the pin, then the middle one, then the bottom. My arms were shaking from the vibration. I checked the clock. 20 minutes gone. I wedged a flathead screwdriver under the hinge plates and pried. With a pop that sounded like a gunshot, the pins flew out. The door was no longer attached to the frame on the right side. I gripped the handle and pulled. The heavy oak slab swung outward, pivoting on the locked deadbolt like a lever. It was heavy, awkwardly balanced, but I heaved it open just enough to squeeze through. The smell hit me first. It wasn't just mold. It was the stench of a cage. Urine, unwashed skin, and the copper tang of fear. It rolled up the stairs like a physical fog, choking me. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and descended into the dark. I didn't turn on the main light. I didn't know if the bulb worked, and I didn't want to startle her. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. I reached the bottom landing. The concrete floor was cold. I swept the light across the room. There, in the corner, huddled on that filthy mattress I had seen on the camera, was a small, trembling shape. She was curled into a fetal ball facing the wall, her hands covering her ears. "Aunt Clara," I whispered. She flinched violently, letting out a sharp, ragged gasp. She didn't turn around. No more, she whimpered. Her voice was brittle like dry leaves stepping on gravel. "I signed the papers. I signed them all. Please, just let me sleep." The rage that surged through me was so hot, it almost blinded me. They had broken her. They had tortured this dignified, kind woman until she surrendered everything, just for the mercy of sleep. "Clara, it's me," I said, my voice cracking. "It's Harry." She went rigid. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out with terror in the harsh beam of my flashlight. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones protruding sharply under paper-thin skin. She stared at me and then she started to scream. Not a scream of relief, but a scream of pure horror. She scrambled backward, the chain on her ankle rattling against the steel column. "No. You're not real," she shrieked, pressing her back against the cold cement. "You're dead. You're a ghost. Get away from me." I dropped to my knees, keeping the light pointed at the floor so I wouldn't blind her. "Clara, look at me. Touch my hand. I am not dead. I am right here." She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. "He died," she sobbed. "Vanessa told me. She showed me the obituary. She said you had a massive stroke in the garden. She said you suffered." I froze. The cruelty of it was a masterpiece of evil. They hadn't just kidnapped her. They had isolated her by killing me in her mind. They removed her only hope of rescue by telling her the only person who would look for her was already in the ground. "She came to my house," Clara stammered, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. She was wearing black. She was crying. She said there was no life insurance. She said she couldn't afford to bury you. She said if I didn't sign the power of attorney over to her, the state would take your body and burn it in a pauper's grave. I closed my eyes, fighting the nausea. That was the leverage. That was the key. Clara had a net worth of over $3 million. She was shrewd with her money, but she had a soft heart. Vanessa knew Clara would never sign over her fortune for herself, but she would do it to save her beloved brother-in-law from the indignity of a pauper's grave. They killed me to steal her life. "Clara, listen to me," I said, reaching out and gripping her ice-cold hands. My hands were warm. She gasped at the contact. I squeezed tight. "I am alive. Vanessa lied to you. She lied to both of us. She told me you were in Arizona enjoying the sun. She told you I was dead so you wouldn't call me for help." Clara stared at my hands, then up at my face. She reached out a trembling finger and touched the mole on my cheek. The realization hit her, and her face crumpled. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh, Harry, we are in hell. We are leaving hell," I told her. "Today." I looked at the chain around her ankle. It was a hardened steel link secured with a heavy padlock. I didn't have the key. I looked at the time. 45 minutes gone. "I can't walk, Harry," she wept. Todd kicked me when I tried to run last week. My hip. I can't stand." I looked at the chain, then at the steel column, then back at the stairs. I couldn't carry her up those stairs and out the front door. The neighbors might see. And if Vanessa came back early and saw us in the driveway, this would turn into a murder-suicide. I needed a way out that didn't involve the front door. And then I looked up. Above the mattress, high on the wall, was the casement window I had seen from the outside. The one painted black. It was small, but the frame was wood. Rotting wood. I stood up. "I'm going to get you out, Clara. But we aren't going out the door. We are going out the back way. And then I am going to burn their world to the ground." I turned back to the stairs to grab my grinder. I had a chain to cut. Sparks flew like angry fireflies in the dark as the cutting wheel bit into the hardened steel of the padlock. I pressed down, ignoring the screaming protest of the metal and the heat radiating against my knuckles. Clara covered her face with her thin, trembling hands, whimpering at the noise, but I kept my eyes on the clock in my head. 60 minutes gone. The shackle snapped with a dull ping. The chain fell away from her ankle, clattering onto the concrete. It was the sound of freedom, but we weren't free yet. I helped Clara stand. She cried out, her legs buckling under her own weight. She was lighter than a child, a ghost of the woman who used to host the best 4th of July parties in the county. I caught her, my arms shaking not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding back the violence I wanted to unleash on the people upstairs. I looked at the stairs. Taking her out the front door was suicide. Todd had installed those cameras last week, bragging about the 4K resolution and the motion sensors. He covered the driveway, the front porch, and the back patio. But Todd was a salesman, not an engineer. He didn't understand angles. He didn't understand blind spots. There was a dead zone, a narrow strip of shadow along the northeast foundation line right behind the overgrown azaleas I had refused to trim for 3 years. And right in the middle of that dead zone was the old coal chute window. I pulled my phone out. My hands were covered in grime and rust. I dialed a number that hadn't changed in 20 years. "Captain Miller," I said when he answered. "It's Harry. Do not ask me how I am. Just listen. Bring your van to the alley behind my house. Turn your lights off. Bring the bolt cutters you keep in your trunk. You have 4 minutes." I didn't wait for an answer. I knew Jim Miller. We had served in the same unit in Vietnam, and he had been the best police captain this town ever had before he retired. He knew the tone of my voice. He knew when a situation had gone FUBAR. I dragged a heavy wooden crate over to the blackened window. It was rotting the wood soft and damp. I climbed up. The window was painted shut, but the frame was compromised. I didn't need finesse. I jammed a pry bar under the sash and heaved. With a wet crunch of splintering wood, the window gave way, swinging inward. Fresh, rain-scented air whilst flooded the basement, cutting through the stench of ammonia and fear. I looked out. The alley was dark. I lifted Clara. She wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. She smelled of neglect, but underneath that she smelled like family. "I'm sorry, Harry," she whispered against my neck. "I'm so sorry I signed." "You saved my life, Clara," I told her, hoisting her up toward the opening. "You signed those papers because you thought I was dead. That's not weakness. That's love. Now you're going to be strong for me one more time." A pair of headlights flashed once in the alley and then went dark. A shadow detached itself from the gloom. It was Miller. He looked older, grayer, but he moved with the silent efficiency of a man who had spent his life hunting predators. He didn't ask questions when he saw the face of the woman I was passing through the window. He just reached out with his big, steady hands and took her. "I've got her, Harry." Miller grunted, lowering her gently to the ground outside. Is that Clara?" "Get her to St. Jude's," I hissed. "The private entrance. Don't use the ER. Call Dr. Patel on the way. Tell him I'm calling in the favor he owes me for his deck. Tell him to hide her. No records under her real name. She is Jane Doe until I say otherwise." Miller nodded, wrapping his coat around Clara's shivering shoulders. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing in the dark. "Come on, Harry. Give me your hand. Let's go." I shook my head. "No." "What do you mean, no?" Miller whispered, his voice urgent. "You can't stay in there. If they did this to her, if I leave now, they get away with it, Jim." "What are you talking about? We have the victim. We call the squad. We kick the doors in. And then what I asked? They claim she has dementia, that she wandered down there, that they were doing their best. They have a fake power of attorney, Jim. They have doctors on their payroll. If we arrest them tonight, they make bail by morning, and they spend the next 10 years fighting me in court with my own money." I looked back into the darkness of the basement. "I need them to commit the big one, Jim. I need them to sell the house. I need them to cross the line from abuse to grand larceny and fraud on a federal level. I need to catch them with the pen in their hand and the check in their pocket." Miller looked at me for a long second. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He nodded once. "Watch your 6, Harry." He disappeared into the dark with Clara. I watched until the van's taillights vanished around the corner. I was alone again. But the cage was empty, and an empty cage would raise the alarm. If Vanessa came down here and saw Clara was gone, the game was over. She would know I did it. She would run. I needed a placeholder. I needed a ghost. I rummaged through the piles of junk Todd had thrown down here over the last year. Old coats, broken lamps, boxes of holiday decorations. I found what I was looking for in a garment bag, an old heavy wool coat that belonged to my late wife, and a foam mannequin head she used for her wig collection. It was crude, but in the dark, under a heap of dirty blankets, it would have to work. I arranged the pillows on the mattress, bunching them up to mimic the curl of a sleeping body. I placed the foam head at the top and draped the gray wool blanket over the entire mass, leaving just a patch of the wig exposed. It looked like a body. It looked like a broken, sleeping old woman. But a body needs a voice. I pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice memo app. I thought about the sounds Clara had made when I first found her, the low, rhythmic whimpering of a soul in pain. I pressed record. I couldn't mimic her voice, but I could mimic the sound of suffering. I groaned a low, guttural sound of distress. I whispered, "Please, please, Harry, water." I stopped recording. I set the file to loop. I didn't have a speaker. I scanned the room. There, on a dusty shelf, was an old Bluetooth speaker Todd had discarded because the battery only lasted an hour. I grabbed it. I plugged it into an extension cord hidden behind the water heater so it wouldn't die. I synced my phone. I slid the speaker deep under the mattress, right where Clara's head had been. I hit play. The sound that filled the room made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a ghostly, muffled moaning coming from beneath the bed. It sounded like someone dying. It sounded like guilt. Perfect. I climbed the stairs. Now for the hardest part. The door. I pushed the heavy oak slab back into the frame. The deadbolt slid into its hole, locking the door from the inside. But the hinges were destroyed. The pins were gone, the heads sheared off. If Todd looked closely, he would see the bright, shiny metal of the fresh cuts. I pulled a small tube of quick-set epoxy putty from my tool belt. It was dark gray, the color of old steel. I molded it over the sheared tops of the hinge pins, shaping it to look like the original round heads. I smeared a little dust and grease from the floor onto the putty to age it. It wouldn't hold up to a kick. It wouldn't even hold if they tried to open the door. But as long as the deadbolt was locked, and as long as they didn't look too closely at the hinges, it would look secure. I packed my tools. I cleaned up the metal shavings with a wet rag. I backed out of the hallway, checking for any sign of my presence. I went back to the living room and sat on the recliner. I checked the time. 10:45 a.m. I had 15 minutes before they returned. My heart rate slowed. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were coming back to a house that was no longer a prison, but a stage. And they were the actors in a tragedy I had just written. I heard the rumble of the SUV in the driveway. The car doors slammed. The key turned in the lock. "We got it," Vanessa's voice rang out, triumphant and sharp. "The lawyer said the papers are airtight. We just need the doctor to sign off on the competency exam tomorrow, and the house is listed by noon." I closed my eyes and let my mouth hang open. I was ready. Let the show begin. The front door slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the rain, but bringing a different kind of storm inside. I sat frozen in the recliner, my hand slipping beneath the throw blanket to grip the handle of my hidden phone. My thumb hovered over the emergency dial button. If they screamed, if I heard the sound of running feet, or the crash of that compromised basement door being kicked open, I was going to call the police and end it all right here. It wasn't the plan, but it was the contingency. Vanessa marched into the living room, tossing her keys onto the side table with a clatter that made me flinch. She was holding a brown paper bag stained with grease at the bottom. The smell of spicy peanut sauce and fried noodles filled the room, a grotesque normalcy that made my stomach turn. "Wake up, Dad," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "We brought dinner. Pad thai. Try not to spill it on the rug this time." I blinked, feigning a groggy awakening. "Did you get the papers signed?" I mumbled, slurring my words just enough to sell the sedation. Vanessa ignored me. She turned to Todd, who was lingering by the front door, looking pale and sweaty. He kept glancing toward the hallway, toward the basement door. Todd, go check on the situation downstairs, she ordered, pulling cartons of food out of the bag. Make sure she hasn't kicked the bucket yet. We need her breathing until the notary sees the house tomorrow. Todd wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Do I have to? It smells like a sewer down there, Ness. And that noise she was making. It gave me the creeps. Just go, Todd. Do you want the money or not? Check the water. If she's dry, give her a cup. But don't engage. Todd grumbled something under his breath and trudged toward the hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment. I had used epoxy putty to reconstruct the heads of the hinge pins I had sheared off, creating a visual illusion of security. But structurally, that door was hanging by the deadbolt and a prayer. If Todd pulled too hard, or if he leaned on it while unlocking it, the whole heavy oak slab would come crashing down, revealing the bright, fresh metal cuts and the fact that I had breached their fortress. I stopped breathing. I listened. I heard the heavy clank of the deadbolt retracting. Then the squeal of the weather stripping. The door opened. I waited for the shout. I waited for Todd to realize the hinges were fake. I waited for him to see the empty mattress or the crude shape I had constructed from pillows and a wig. But there was silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Then I heard the door close. The deadbolt slid back into place with a solid thud. Todd walked back into the kitchen. He looked worse than before. His skin had a gray, clammy sheen to it. Well, Vanessa asked, snapping a pair of chopsticks apart. She's out cold, Todd said, his voice shaky. She's bundled up under that gray blanket. Didn't move an inch when I shined the light on her. Good, Vanessa said, taking a bite of noodles. The extra dose worked. Yeah, but... Todd hesitated. He poured himself a glass of wine, his hand trembling so much the bottle clinked against the rim. She's making noises, Ness. Even in her sleep. It's like this low moaning sound. Coming from under the blankets. It doesn't sound human. I fought the urge to smile. The Bluetooth speaker was doing its job. The loop of guttural groans I had recorded was playing softly, from beneath the mattress, just loud enough to unsettle him, just quiet enough to sound like a dying woman's last breaths. It's just the drugs. Todd. Vanessa dismissed him, though she didn't look at him. Eat your dinner. I shuffled into the kitchen and sat at my usual spot at the island. They ignored me eating with the ravenous appetite of people who believe they have won. I stared at my plate. I couldn't eat. I knew that beneath us in the dark, a plastic mannequin head was wearing my dead wife's wig, and my own voice was haunting my son-in-law. I decided to push. I needed to see how far they would go to deny reality. I needed to confirm their gaslighting for the final record. I tapped my spoon against the counter. I hear it too, I said softly. Vanessa stopped chewing. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Hear what, Dad? The crying, I said, looking at the floorboards. There is someone crying under the floor. It sounds like a ghost. Is this house haunted, Vanessa? Todd dropped his fork. It clattered onto his plate. He looked at Vanessa, his eyes wide with panic. See, even the old man hears it. I told you, Ness, it's too loud. Vanessa slammed her hand down on the counter. Shut up, Todd. She turned on me, her face twisting into a mask of cruel impatience. There is no one crying, Dad. How many times do we have to go through this? It's the pipes, the plumbing in this old house is falling apart because you were too cheap to update it 20 years ago. But it's calling my name, I whispered, leaning in. It says, Harry, help me. That was a risk. The recording didn't say my name, but I wanted to see if guilt would make them hear things that weren't there. Vanessa stood up, towering over me. You are losing your mind, old man. Do you hear me? You are hearing things because your brain is turning to mush. You forgot to take your afternoon pills again, didn't you? I shrank back, playing the part of the cowed, confused father. I took the blue one. You are hallucinating, she shouted, her voice rising to a shriek. There is no ghost. There is no crying. It is the water pipes expanding in the cold. God, I can't wait to get you into a facility where professionals can deal with your delusions. I am done babysitting a crazy person. She grabbed her wineglass and stormed out of the kitchen, heading for the living room. Todd stayed behind. He looked at me, then at the floor. He took a long drink of wine. It's just pipes, Harry, he muttered, trying to convince himself more than me. Just old pipes. He got up and followed his wife, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I looked at the basement door. The epoxy held. The speaker played on, and my daughter had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle. She was so convinced of her own power, so desperate to believe her own lies, that she would ignore the sounds of her own conscience until the handcuffs were on her wrists. I picked up a fork and took a bite of the cold noodles. Suddenly, I was hungry. I needed my strength. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. The silence in the house following the incident with the ghost noises was brittle like glass about to shatter. Todd was drinking heavily in the kitchen, muttering about old pipes and stress, while Vanessa paced the living room floor. I remained in my spot at the island, picking at my cold noodles, pretending to be the confused old man losing his grip on reality. But beneath the table, my leg was bouncing with a nervous energy I hadn't felt since I was a young engineer waiting for a bridge load test. I needed to know why. I knew they were greedy. I knew they were entitled. But the desperation I had seen in Vanessa's eyes, the sheer panic that fueled her cruelty, suggested something more than just a desire for a lifestyle upgrade. People don't kidnap their aunts and drug their fathers just to buy a better car. They do it because they are running from something. I got my answer 20 minutes later. Vanessa's phone rang. It wasn't her usual ringtone, the cheerful pop song she used for friends. It was a harsh, standard buzz. She looked at the screen, and her face went the color of ash. She didn't answer it right away. She looked at me, then at Todd, and walked quickly into the sunroom, sliding the glass door shut behind her. She thought the glass was soundproof. It wasn't. I had installed that door myself. It was single-pane tempered glass meant for safety, not privacy. And she forgot that my hearing aids, which I adjusted while feigning a scratch at my ear, could pick up a whisper from across the room. I didn't look at her. I stared at my noodles, but I focused every ounce of my attention on her voice. Please, I need more time, Vanessa hissed into the phone. Her back was to me, her shoulders hunched. It is happening. The house is as good as sold. We have a cash buyer lined up for Monday. She paused, listening. Then she flinched as if the person on the other end had slapped her. $500,000 by Friday is impossible, unless I sell the house, she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. I know what you said. I know the interest is compounding. But if you send your guys here now, you get nothing. You have to wait until the title transfers. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. $500,000. By Friday. Today was Tuesday. They weren't just broke. They were dead. That kind of debt with that kind of deadline didn't come from a bank. It came from the kind of people who solved late payments with baseball bats and concrete shoes. Todd's gambling problem wasn't just a habit. It was a death sentence, and they were trying to pay for it with my life. I understood everything then. The rush to get Clara's power of attorney. The urgency to declare me incompetent. They were trying to liquidate 2 lifetimes of hard work to save their own skins from a shark they had invited into the water. Vanessa hung up. She stood there for the moment, her forehead pressed against the cool glass, breathing hard. Then she straightened her spine, put her mask back on, and walked back into the kitchen. She looked at Todd. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the panic she had just shown. It is done, she said. I bought us until Friday noon. But that is the hard deadline. Todd looked up from his wine, his eyes bloodshot. What about the old man? He's losing it, Ness. If he starts talking to the neighbors about ghosts and crying, he won't be talking to anyone. Vanessa cut him off. I called Dr. Thorne. He is coming tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Todd straightened up. Thorne. The guy who wrote the scripts for your back. The same. He lost his license to practice in the hospital, but he still has his pad and his stamp. For $5,000 cash, he agreed to do a home visit. He is going to certify that Dad has advanced dementia and is a danger to himself and others. And then Todd asked, "And then you drive him to Green Meadows," Vanessa said. Green Meadows. I knew the place. It was a state-run facility on the south side, a warehouse for the indigent and the forgotten. It smelled of urine and despair. People went in there and they didn't come out. We drop him off. Vanessa continued outlining my demise with the efficiency of a project manager. We file the emergency guardianship papers by noon. We accept the cash offer on the house by 2:00 p.m. We pay the debt on Friday morning. And we are free. And Clara, Todd asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. We deal with Clara tonight, Vanessa said. She needs to be gone before the appraiser walks through on Thursday. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. They had a timeline. I had less than 12 hours. I yawned a loud, exaggerated sound that made them both jump. I think I will go to bed, I announced, shuffling off the stool. These vitamins make me so sleepy. Go on, Dad, Vanessa said, not even looking at me. Sleep tight. I walked to the guest room, closing the door with a soft click. As soon as the latch engaged, I dropped the act. I moved to the desk in the corner and pulled out my laptop. I didn't turn on the room lights. The glow of the screen was enough. They thought I was a retired engineer with a pension and a paid-off house. That was true. But they didn't know about the patent. In 1998, I developed a specialized seismic dampener for suspension bridges. It wasn't sexy technology, but it was essential. Every time a bridge was built in an earthquake zone, I got a royalty check. I had never touched the money. I lived on my pension because I was a simple man who liked simple things. I let the royalties accumulate in a separate offshore account that my wife and I had set up for a rainy day. It was pouring rain now. I logged into the secure banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the two-factor authentication with the fob I kept hidden in the hollow heel of my work boot. Balance $5,240,000. I looked at the number. It was just digits on a screen, but right now it was ammunition. I opened a second tab and navigated to the client portal of Patel and Associates. Rajiv Patel was the son of my old foreman. I had paid for his law school tuition when his father died on the job. He was now one of the sharpest estate attorneys in Seattle, and he was the only person on earth who knew about the patent money. I initiated a secure chat. It was late, but Rajiv always worked late. Harry, the message popped up instantly. Everything okay? I typed quickly. Protocol Omega. They are making their move tomorrow. 9 a.m. Corrupt doctor. Forced institutionalization. Selling the house. The 3 dots danced on the screen. I am drafting the injunctions now, Rajiv replied. But if they get guardianship before we can file, they can freeze your assets. I know, I typed. That is why I am moving the Queen. I switched back to the banking tab. I initiated a wire transfer. Not to another bank, but to an irrevocable trust I had set up years ago as a doomsday contingency. The trust had a singular specific clause. The funds could only be accessed or managed by a trustee who possessed a physical cryptographic key. I had the key. It was on a USB drive around my neck. I typed in the amount $5 million. I hit transfer. The screen buffered for a second, then flashed green. Transaction complete. I sat back, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. I had just bankrupted Harold Keaton. If Vanessa and Todd got guardianship tomorrow, they would gain control of an account with exactly $240 in it. The house was worth money, sure, But without the cash reserves, they couldn't pay the immediate demands of the loan sharks. And the moment they tried to sell the house, they would find that I had placed a lien on my own property, through the trust effectively freezing any sale until a court hearing. I went back to the chat with Rajiv. Money is moved. The house is bait. Let them take the bait. I need you to be ready to spring the trap. When Rajiv asked, tomorrow morning, I typed, when the doctor arrives, I am going to put on the performance of a lifetime. And Rajiv, bring the cavalry. I closed the laptop and hid it under the mattress. I lay down in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I could hear Vanessa and Todd moving around upstairs, their footsteps heavy and agitated. They were preparing to destroy me. They were counting chickens that had already flown the coop. I touched the small USB drive hanging against my chest. It was cold metal, but it felt like a shield. Tomorrow, Dr. Thorne would ask me what year it was. He would ask me who the president was. And I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to be the most confused, helpless, demented old man he had ever seen. I was going to sign his papers. I was going to let them think they had won. Because the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall when I kicked the ladder out from under them. I closed my eyes. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was an engineer. I had identified the stress points. I had calculated the load. And tomorrow I was going to bring the whole structure down on their heads. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m., piercing the tense silence of the house like a starter pistol. I was sitting in my recliner wearing my oldest, most stained cardigan, the one with the missing button that Vanessa always hated. I had spent the last 30 minutes staring at a blank spot on the wall, practicing my vacant expression. When the door opened, I didn't turn my head. I kept my gaze fixed on the plaster, letting my mouth hang slightly slack. Vanessa rushed to the door. I heard the murmur of voices, the heavy tread of boots, and the rustle of a raincoat. When they walked into the living room, the smell hit me before the man did. It was a cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, and wintergreen mints trying to cover up the scent of last night's whiskey. Dr. Thorne didn't look like a healer. He looked like a man who had sold his soul for a quick payout years ago and was now just haggling over the price of the receipt. He was thin, with skin the color of old parchment, and eyes that darted around the room, assessing the value of the furniture rather than the health of the patient. He carried a battered leather medical bag that looked more like a prop than a tool of the trade. Mr. Keaton, Vanessa said, her voice pitched high with fake cheerfulness. This is Dr. Thorne. He is just here to check on you. Remember, for your insurance. I slowly turned my head, counting to 5 before my eyes focused on him. I blinked rapidly. Insurance, I rasped. I don't need insurance. I have the union pension. Martha handles the bills. Vanessa sighed, a theatrical sound of long-suffering patience. Dad. Mom has been dead for 10 years. I frowned, letting confusion wash over my face. No, she's in the kitchen. She's making pancakes. I can smell the blueberries. Dr. Thorne pulled a folding chair closer to me. He sat down, his knee is popping. He pulled a penlight from his pocket, but he didn't shine it in my eyes. He just held it, tapping it against his palm. Good morning, Harold, he said. His voice was oily. Can you tell me what year it is? I looked at him, then at Vanessa, then back at the wall. It's 1998, I whispered. We just got the internet installed. It's very fast. Todd, who was lurking in the doorway, let out a nervous snort. Vanessa shot him a glare that could have cut glass. Dr. Thorne didn't even blink. He scribbled something on a clipboard. I see, Thorne said. And can you tell me who the President of the United States is? I smiled a wide, foolish grin. Clinton, I said proudly. Slick Willie. He's in trouble again, isn't he? Thorne nodded, making another check mark. He leaned in closer. Harold, do you know who these people are? He pointed the pen at Vanessa and Todd. I squinted at them. That's That's the cleaning lady, I said, pointing a shaking finger at my daughter. And the gardener. But he's lazy. He never cuts the hedges right. Vanessa flinched. The insult landed, but she swallowed it because it served her purpose. See, she whispered to the doctor. He doesn't know us. Yesterday he thought the toaster was a radio. He is dangerous, doctor. He tried to light the stove with a newspaper. That was a lie, but a good one. It added the element of physical danger required for an emergency hold. Thorne stood up. He hadn't taken my blood pressure. He hadn't listened to my heart. He had asked 3 questions and decided my fate. It is clear, Thorne said, capping his pen. Advanced cognitive decline. Likely Alzheimer's with paranoid delusions. He is completely incapacitated. I will sign the certificate. He needs 24-hour secure care. Immediately. Thank you. Dr. Vanessa said, her relief palpable. She pulled an envelope from her purse. It was thick. Cash. She handed it to him discreetly, but I saw the transaction. $5,000 for a life sentence. Thorne took the envelope and slipped it into his jacket. He pulled a form from his clipboard, signed it with a flourish, and stamped it. This authorizes immediate transport to a secure facility, he said. Do you have the transport arranged? Todd stepped forward. I'll drive him. The place is expecting us at noon, Good Thorne said. He looked at me one last time, not with pity, but with the indifference of a butcher looking at a side of beef. Good luck, Harold. He left. The front door closed. The lock clicked. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The tension broke, replaced by a frenetic energy. Vanessa grabbed a stack of legal documents from the coffee table. These weren't medical forms. I knew what a quitclaim deed looked like. I knew what a durable power of attorney looked like. The font was standard, the paper heavy bond. Okay, Dad, Vanessa said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table, invading my personal space. The doctor said you are doing great, but we need to sign some paperwork for your new apartment. It is just routine, just to make sure they can give you your medicine. She placed the papers on my lap. She handed me a pen. It was a nice pen, a Mont Blanc I had given her for her college graduation. She was using my own gift to rob me. Sign here, she said, pointing to the line at the bottom of the deed. And here. And initial here. I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes, but not because I was confused. I was reading every clause. Transfer of title. Revocation of prior wills. Full financial authority. I let my hand hover over the paper. The tip of the pen shook violently. I looked up at Vanessa. Her eyes were wide, hungry. She was holding her breath. Is this for the contest? I asked softly. What Vanessa snapped, then caught herself. Yes. Yes, Dad. It's for the contest. You won. You just need to sign to get the prize. I smiled. I love winning, I mumbled. I lowered the pen. I pressed the nib to the paper. In my mind, I was back in 1985 signing off on the blueprints for the Weston Tower. My signature was usually a sharp, angular thing, precise and legible. Harold J. Keaton. But today, Harold J. Keaton didn't exist. Today, I was an illusionist. I started to write. I made the letters loopy, jagged, and erratic. I dragged the pen across the line, skipping spots, pressing too hard in others. It looked like the signature of a man whose brain was firing on half its cylinders. But I didn't write Keaton. I wrote an H, then a scribbled loop that looked like an A, then a sharp R. But then instead of finishing my name, I let the pen wander. I wrote a K, and then hidden in the messy tremors of a senile scrawl, I wrote the letters Houdini, Harold K. Houdini, because I was about to pull off the greatest escape act of my life. I lifted the pen. I looked at the signature. It was a mess. It was illegible to the untrained eye. It looked like Harold Keaton if you weren't looking closely. But legally, it was a nullity. It was a joke. And more importantly, it did not match the signature card on file at my bank, nor the signature on my original deed. No notary worth their salt would accept it, and no judge would uphold it. Vanessa didn't check. She didn't look at the letters. She just saw ink on the line. She snatched the papers away from me as if they were burning her fingers. "Done," she shouted, jumping up. She waved the papers at Todd. "We got it. The house is ours," Todd pumped his fist. "Yes, call the buyer. Tell them we have the title signed. We can close tomorrow." Vanessa was already dialing, turning her back on me. She was laughing a high, giddy sound of victory. She thought she had just secured $500,000. She thought she had won. I slumped back in the chair, dropping the pen on the floor. I let my chin hit my chest. I closed my eyes. They were celebrating. They were high on the dopamine of theft. They didn't notice that the old man in the chair wasn't sleeping. I was listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and strong. I had signed the papers. I had played the fool. I had given them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. And now all I had to do was wait for the trapdoor to open. The clock on the wall ticked past 10 p.m. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb waiting to be filled. I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clinking of glasses in the kitchen. Vanessa and Todd were celebrating. They had the deed. They had the power of attorney. They thought they had the keys to the kingdom. But greed is a hungry beast. It is never satisfied. I knew that the moment the ink was dry on those fraudulent papers, the calculations would change. I was no longer an obstacle to the money. I was now just an expense. A monthly bill for a nursing home. A liability that could still talk. I heard Todd's heavy footsteps approaching the living room, followed by the lighter click of Vanessa's heels. They stopped just outside my door. The wood was thin. I didn't need to strain to hear them. "Why are we waiting, Ness?" Todd's voice was slurred, thick with whiskey and malice. "We have the papers. The house is ours. Why are we going to spend $5,000 a month on a facility that is $60,000 a year? That cuts into my share." "Your share," Vanessa hissed. "It is my inheritance, Todd. You just spent it before I even got it." Whatever, Todd grunted. "The point is, he is old. His heart is bad. He is confused. If he, didn't wake up tomorrow, it would solve everything. No nursing home. No questions. Just a grieving daughter and a quick cremation." I felt a cold hand squeeze my chest. I had anticipated theft. I had anticipated imprisonment. But hearing your own murder being discussed like a line item on a budget sheet is a different kind of horror. It strips away the last layer of denial. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. I held my breath. "It is risky," she said finally. Her voice wasn't shocked. It was calculating. "It is not risky," Todd pressed. "He takes those heart pills, doesn't he, digoxin? If he takes too many, well, old hearts give out. It happens every day. Who is going to autopsy a senile 70-year-old? I lay there, my body rigid. Digoxin. I did have a prescription for it for a mild arrhythmia I developed 5 years ago, but I hadn't taken it in months. My heart was strong. I kept the bottle on the nightstand because Vanessa expected to see it there. Vanessa sighed. "Fine. But we do it my way. No violence, no pillows. Just an accident with his dosage. He is confused, right? He forgot he already took them." "Go get them," Todd said. I sat up. I had maybe 30 seconds. I reached into the bottom drawer of the nightstand under a stack of old socks. I pulled out an identical orange prescription bottle. I had prepared this 3 days ago, the moment I realized they were desperate enough to kill. The bottle on my nightstand contained the real medication. The bottle in my hand contained high-potency vitamin B complex tablets. They looked exactly the same, small, round, wound, and pale yellow. I swapped the bottles. I shoved the real medication under the mattress and placed the vitamin bottle back on the nightstand, the cap slightly askew. Then I lay back down, pulling the covers up to my chin. I slowed my breathing. I let my mouth fall open. The door creaked open. Dad, Vanessa whispered. I didn't move. I let out a soft, rattling snore. She walked into the room. Todd loomed in the doorway, a dark shape against the hall light. Vanessa picked up the bottle from the nightstand. She shook it. Wake him up, Todd whispered. Vanessa shook my shoulder. Dad, wake up. I jerked awake, my eyes flying open. I looked at her with wild, unfocused panic. Who? What is it time for school? No, Dad. Vanessa said, her voice smooth and deadly. You forgot your heart medicine. You didn't take it at dinner. I frowned, pushing myself up on my elbows. I thought I did. The blue one. No, the yellow ones, she said. You need to take them now or you might get sick. Here. She poured the pills into her hand. Not one. Not two. 6. 6 tablets. A lethal dose for a man my age if they were real. She held them out to me. Take them, Dad. All at once. It is better that way. I looked at the pills in her palm. Then I looked at her face. There was no love there, no hesitation. Just a cold, hard impatience to be done with me. I reached out with a trembling hand. I took the pills. Okay, I mumbled. Okay, Mommy. I put the handful of vitamins into my mouth. They tasted chalky and bitter. I chewed them clumsily, letting a little white froth escape my lips, and swallowed. Good, Vanessa said. She handed me a glass of water. Drink. I drank. I drained the glass. Now lie down, she said. Go to sleep. I lay back. I counted to 10 in my head. Then I started the show. I let my body go rigid. I arched my back off the mattress. I made a choking, gurgling sound in the back of my throat. What is he doing? Todd asked, stepping into the room. Shh, Vanessa hissed. Just watch. I convulsed. I thrashed my legs under the blankets. I clawed at my chest, my eyes rolling back into my head. I let out one final long exhale, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. Then I went limp. I stopped moving. I held my breath. The room was silent. Is he? Todd whispered. Vanessa moved closer. She leaned over me. I could feel her breath on my face. She placed 2 fingers against my neck. I have practiced holding my breath for this moment. I have practiced slowing my heart rate through meditation techniques I learned years ago to manage stress. My pulse was there, but it was slow, steady, and faint. He is still warm, she whispered. But his pulse is... It is very weak. Should we do something? Todd asked. His voice was high, panicked. Like call 911, Vanessa stood up. She stared down at me. I could feel her gaze. It was a weight. No, she said clearly. No, Todd asked. If we call 911, they might save him, she said. And then they might ask why he has 6 pills in his stomach. They might ask why we gave them to him. So we just... We wait, Vanessa said. We go upstairs. We go to sleep. And tomorrow morning when I come down to make coffee, I will find him. He passed away in his sleep. On old age? His heart just gave out. It is tragic, but it happens. But what if he wakes up? Todd asked. He won't wake up, Vanessa said. Not after that dose. Come on." She turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. I heard their footsteps retreating. I heard the door click shut. I lay there in the dark, my lungs burning for air, my heart breaking for the daughter I had once carried on my shoulders. She had just watched me die, and her only concern was the timeline. I exhaled slowly, quietly. I took a deep breath of the stale air. I wasn't dead. I was just underground. I lay still for an hour, waiting for the house to settle, waiting for the silence to return. My mind was racing. They thought I was a corpse. They thought the problem was solved. But corpses don't make phone calls. And corpses don't have $5 million in a trust fund designed to destroy the people who killed them. I sat up in the darkness. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. Todd would be coming down soon. Not to check on me, but to check on the basement. He had mentioned earlier that they needed to deal with Clara tonight. They thought I was gone, which meant they felt safe to finish the job downstairs. I slipped out of bed. I didn't need the cane anymore. I moved to the door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty. I crept toward the kitchen. I needed to be in position. Tonight my son-in-law was going to go down into the dark to kill an old woman. But he wasn't going to find a victim. He was going to find a ghost. And I was going to be the one pulling the strings. The house settled into a silence that felt heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I stood in the deep shadows of the kitchen pantry. The door cracked just an inch. From my vantage point, I had a clear line of sight to the hallway and the basement door. I wasn't breathing. I was waiting. It was 12:15 a.m., the witching hour for cowards. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Heavy, uneven footsteps moved across the landing. Todd. He was trying to be quiet, but he moved with the clumsiness of a man who had consumed half a bottle of bourbon to drown out his conscience. He came down the stairs, his hand gripping the banister, white-knuckled. In his other hand, glinting in the faint light from the street lamps outside, was a kitchen knife. A long, serrated carving knife. My stomach turned over. I had suspected their plan, but seeing the weapon made it real in a way that legal documents never could. They weren't just going to let Clara rot down there. They were going to stage a scene. The narrative wrote itself in my engineer's mind. The crazy aunt breaks out of her confinement, stabs her brother-in-law in his sleep, and then in a fit of remorse or madness turns the knife on herself. It was sloppy, it was brutal, but to a lazy police force looking for an easy answer, it might just work. Todd paused at the bottom of the stairs. He looked toward my bedroom door. It was closed. He thought my body was cooling in there. He wiped his sweating forehead with his sleeve and turned toward the basement door. I watched him reach for the deadbolt. My repair job on the hinges held. The epoxy putty looked enough like steel in the dark to fool a drunk man. He turned the lock. The click echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. He opened the door. The smell of the basement drifted out, stale air, damp concrete, and the lingering scent of fear. Todd hesitated. He held the knife up the blade, trembling. He took a breath that sounded like a sob, and then he descended into the dark. I moved. I slipped out of the pantry and crossed the kitchen floor in my socks, silent as a ghost. I stopped at the top of the basement stairs. I didn't go down. I didn't need to. Acoustics were my specialty. The stairwell acted as a funnel, amplifying every sound from the concrete box below. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the Bluetooth controller app. The signal was strong. The speaker hidden under the mattress was ready. Below me, I heard Todd's footsteps scuffing against the cement. He was moving slowly, probably using the flashlight on his phone. Then I heard the moaning. The loop I had left playing. Low, guttural sounds of distress. "Make it stop," Todd whispered. His voice drifted up the stairs, thin and terrified. "Just make it stop." He was talking to himself. He was psyching himself up to kill a helpless old woman. I heard the rustle of the tarp I had laid over the mannequin. I heard the sudden violent movement of air as he lunged. There was a thud, a wet, dull impact. I closed my eyes. He had done it. He had driven that knife into the pile of blankets. If Clara had been there, she would be dead. That was the final line. There was no going back for him now. He wasn't just a thief or a fraudster. In his heart and by his actions, he was a murderer. Then came the silence, a confused, heavy silence. I imagined him standing there, the knife buried in the wool coat and the foam head. I imagined him realizing there was no scream, no blood, no resistance. "What the?" Todd muttered. I heard the sound of blankets being ripped away, the clatter of the knife falling to the concrete floor. "What is this?" he whimpered. His voice rose in panic. "What is this, Vanessa?" He had found the wig. He had found the foam head. His brain was trying to process the impossibility of it. The woman he had come to kill had turned into a pile of laundry. It was time. I tapped the screen of my phone. I stopped the moaning track. I selected the new file I had recorded in the bathroom while they were arguing upstairs. I turned the volume all the way up. The sound that erupted from the speaker under the bed wasn't a moan. It was my voice, clear, calm, and terrifyingly authoritative. "Looking for someone's son-in-law." I heard a scream from the basement that sounded like an animal caught in a trap. A high-pitched, garbled yelp of pure terror. Todd scrambled back, crashing into the metal shelving unit. Tools clattered to the floor. "Who's there?" he shrieked. "Who said that I pressed the next button on the soundboard I had created?" "Clara isn't here, Todd," my recorded voice boomed through the basement, bouncing off the concrete walls surrounding him. "She is having tea with the sheriff. They are looking at the pictures of your chains right now." "No," Todd sobbed. "No, no, no. You're dead. I saw you die." He was arguing with a recording. His mind had snapped. The guilt, the alcohol, and the impossible reality of the situation had broken him. I hit the third button. This one wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a prison cell door slamming shut. A heavy metallic final clang that I had downloaded from a sound effects library. "Run, Todd." My voice whispered from the speaker. "Run before they catch you." That was the trigger. I heard him scramble. He slipped on the concrete, fell hard, and scrambled up again. He was panting, hyperventilating, making sounds like a cornered rat. He charged up the stairs. I stepped back into the shadows of the kitchen, pressing myself against the refrigerator. Todd burst through the basement doorway. He looked insane. His eyes were wide and white, his face slick with sweat and grime from the basement floor. He had lost the knife. He had lost his mind. He didn't even look toward the kitchen. He looked toward the front door. His only thought was escape. He needed to get away from the house, away from the ghost in the basement, away from the dead father-in-law who knew everything. He fumbled with the locks on the front door, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't grip the deadbolt turn. "Vanessa," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Vanessa, wake up! We have to go! It's a trap! It's all a trap!" He finally got the door open. He threw it wide, revealing the rainy night outside. He thought he was running toward freedom. He thought he could grab his wife and disappear before the consequences caught up to him. But he was wrong. He wasn't running toward freedom. He was running toward the spotlight. I watched him stumble out onto the porch into the driving rain. I walked calmly to the open door. I didn't hide anymore. I stood in the threshold, the master of my house watching the rat scurry into the trap. I checked my watch. 12:20 a.m. Right on time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. Not for the TV, for the external floodlights I had installed 3 years ago and wired to a separate circuit breaker that only I controlled. I pressed the button, and the night turned into day. Todd stumbled out onto the porch, his eyes squeezing shut against the searing white light that had obliterated the night. He raised his hands instinctively, shielding his face, looking like a vampire caught in the sun. Vanessa was right behind him, her silk robe flapping in the wind, her face a mask of sleep-deprived confusion. She grabbed Todd's arm, her nails digging into his flesh. "Who is that?" she shrieked, squinting into the glare. "Todd, what did you do? It's a trap!" Todd wailed, spinning around, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "The basement. The ghost. He called the cops." From the darkness beyond the blinding wall of light, a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone. It wasn't the local sheriff. It was a voice that carried the weight of federal authority. "Vanessa Keaton, Todd Miller, this is the FBI. Stay where you are. Keep your hands visible." Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Todd, then at the lights, her brain misfiring. FBI. For a domestic dispute. For a confused old man, this wasn't a wellness check. This was a raid. Shadows moved in the periphery of the light. Armored vests. Rifles held at the low ready. They swarmed the lawn, cutting off every angle of retreat. "But, my dad..." Vanessa stammered, her voice thin and small against the overwhelming force arrayed against her. "He's sick. We were just..." She didn't finish the sentence. She sensed movement behind her. Not the shuffling, cane-dragging movement of a dying man, but the confident, heavy stride of the master of the house. She turned slowly. I stepped out of the shadows of the foyer and into the frame of the doorway. I wasn't wearing the stained cardigan or the pajama bottoms. I was wearing my charcoal three-piece suit, the one I had worn to accept the Engineer of the Year award in 2005. My tie was knotted with mathematical precision. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. I stood tall, my spine straight, the years of feigned frailty shedding off me like a heavy coat. Vanessa stared at me. Her eyes traveled over my suit, my posture, my clear, cold gaze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man she had drugged, the man she had mocked, the man she thought was cooling in his bed, was standing there looking like a judge at a sentencing. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. You took the pills. I watched you. You're dead." I stepped onto the porch. The wind blew rain onto my face, but I didn't blink. I looked down at them, at the daughter who had betrayed me and the parasite she had married. I reached into my jacket pocket. Todd flinched, whimpering, thinking I was pulling a gun. Vanessa just shook, unable to look away. I pulled out a crystal tumbler I had grabbed from the study. It was filled with amber liquid. I swirled it gently, the ice clinking against the glass, a sharp, clear sound in the tense silence. "I didn't take your pills, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm, projecting clearly over the rain and the idling engines. "I spit them into a napkin while you were counting your inheritance." I took a slow sip, savoring the burn. "But I did have time for a glass of the 20-year-old whiskey you were saving for my funeral." I continued, gesturing with the glass. It seemed appropriate to drink a toast. "A toast to what?" Todd croaked, his eyes darting between me and the agents advancing up the driveway. "To my freedom," I said, "and to your long, long vacation." The agents moved in then. "Federal agents, get on the ground now." Vanessa lunged toward me. Her hands clawed, a scream of pure, incoherent rage tearing from her throat. "You liar! You ruined everything! It's my money!" She never reached me. Two agents intercepted her, spinning her around and slamming her against the porch railing. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp metallic sound that signaled the end of her life as she knew it. "Daddy, tell them," she screamed as they dragged her down the steps. "Tell them you're confused. Tell them it's a mistake." I took another sip of whiskey. "I am not confused, Vanessa," I said softly. "I have never been more clear." They grabbed Todd next. He didn't fight. He just stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant. The voice, he mumbled as they cuffed him. In the basement. It knew. There are no ghosts, Todd, I said, looking him in the eye. Just a Bluetooth speaker and a father-in-law who knows how to use a sound editor. He slumped, the fight draining out of him as the humiliating reality of his terror set in. He let them drag him to the car without a word. I stood on the porch watching the flashing lights paint my neighborhood in red and blue. The rain washed the driveway clean. The nightmare was over. I finished my drink, set the glass on the railing, and walked down the steps to meet the agents. It was time to go get Clara. The flashing red and blue lights outside were mesmerizing, casting long, dancing shadows across the living room walls, but the real show was about to happen inside. The federal agents had secured the perimeter, but I had asked the lead agent for one professional courtesy. I told him I had the recording of the conspiracy to commit murder, and I wanted to verify the suspects' identities against the video evidence immediately. It was a thin excuse, but the agent, a man named Sterling, who looked like he had seen enough family tragedies to understand the need for closure, agreed to bring them into the foyer before transporting them. They were dragged in, handcuffed and soaking wet. Vanessa's silk robe clung to her legs, and her mascara was running in black streaks down her face, making her look like a melting wax figure. Todd was hyperventilating, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for another exit. As soon as the door closed, cutting off the noise of the rain, Vanessa snapped. The shock wore off, replaced by the cornered rat survival instinct I had seen flashes of for years. It was him, she screamed, twisting in the grip of the agent holding her arm. She threw her head back, looking at me with wild, desperate eyes. Daddy, listen to me, Todd forced me. He owes money to the cartel. He said they would kill us all if we didn't pay. I was trying to protect you. Todd's head snapped up. You lying witch, he roared, spit flying from his mouth. You planned the whole thing. You were the one who researched the poison. You were the one who called the fake doctor. I just drove the car. He forced me to mix the pills, Vanessa wailed, her voice cracking. I didn't want to. You handed them to him, Todd shouted back. You watched him swallow them and said, Good riddance. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their screaming match like a razor blade. They both froze, panting, looking at me. I was standing by the fireplace, the remote control in my hand. You are both exhausted, I said calmly. Why don't we watch a movie? I pointed the remote at the 80-inch flat-screen television mounted above the mantel. Todd had bought it with my credit card 3 months ago, claiming it was for my viewing pleasure, though he was the only one who watched it. I pressed the power button. The screen flared to life. I had already cast the file from my laptop. The image was crisp. It was a wide-angle shot of this very living room recorded just hours ago. The timestamp in the corner read 10:15 p.m. On the screen, Vanessa and Todd were standing in the hallway. The audio recorded by the high-fidelity microphone on my laptop, which I had left running on the side table, was crystal clear. Why are we waiting? Ness Todd's voice boomed through the room's surround sound speakers. If he, didn't wake up tomorrow, it would solve everything. Vanessa on the screen hesitated, then answered, It is risky. But we do it my way. No violence. Just an accident with his dosage. In the living room, the real Vanessa let out a strangled sob. She stared at the screen, watching herself plot the murder of her own father. I fast-forwarded. The timestamp jumped to 12:12 a.m. The angle changed. This was footage from the small security camera I had installed inside the air return vent in the hallway 2 days ago, a little piece of spycraft I picked up from a paranoid client in the 90s. On screen, Todd was walking down the hall. He was holding the carving knife. The light glinted off the serrated edge. He looked at my bedroom door, then turned toward the basement. Make it stop, the on-screen Todd whispered. Just make it stop. The real Todd squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently. Turn it off, he begged. Please, God, turn it off. I paused the video. The image froze on Todd's face, illuminated by the hallway nightlight, twisted into a mask of murderous intent. That is enough, I said. The agents were silent. They had seen enough to put them away for life. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial. It was a front-row seat to a conspiracy. Vanessa sagged in the agent's grip. Her knees hit the floor. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice broken and small. "I have a sickness. I need help. I didn't mean it. Please, don't let them take me. The house. We can sell the house and pay Todd's debts. We can fix this." I looked at her. Even now, on her knees in handcuffs, she was calculating. She was still trying to negotiate. "The house isn't yours to sell," Vanessa, a voice said from the kitchen doorway. Vanessa and Todd spun around. Rajiv Patel stepped into the living room. He was wearing a trench coat over his suit, shaking the rain off a black umbrella. He looked like exactly what he was, the most expensive, ruthless estate attorney in the city. "Who is that?" Todd croaked. "This is my lawyer," I said, "and he has some news about your paperwork." Rajiv walked over to the coffee table, where the signed documents still lay scattered, forgotten in the chaos. He picked up the quitclaim deed. He adjusted his glasses and looked at it with a look of mild amusement. "You were so excited to get the signature," Rajiv said, looking down at Vanessa. "You didn't even read it." He held the document up. He pointed to the signature line. "Harold K. Houdini," Rajiv read aloud. Vanessa squinted, her face contorting in confusion. "What number he signed it?" "I saw him." "You saw ink on paper," Rajiv corrected. "But this is not a legal signature. And even if it were, Mr. Keaton executed a transfer of the property into an irrevocable trust yesterday afternoon. By the time you handed him this pen, he no longer owned the house personally. You were trying to steal a ghost." Vanessa stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. The realization that she had committed attempted murder for a piece of paper that was worthless washed over her. "And as for the money," Rajiv continued, turning to look at Todd, "you seem to be under the impression that Mr. Keaton is a pensioner living on Social Security." Todd looked up, sweat dripping from his nose. "Isn't he?" Rajiv laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Mr. Keaton holds the patent for the K4 seismic dampener," Rajiv said. "It is used in suspension bridges in Japan, California, and Chile. His current liquid assets exceed $10 million. The silence that filled the room was absolute. $10 million. I saw the number land on them like a physical weight. Vanessa's eyes went wide, the pupils dilating. She looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see her father. I saw a stranger looking at a lottery ticket she had just set on fire. $10 million, she whispered. "You had $10 million, and you let us live like this. You let us struggle. I didn't let you struggle, Vanessa." I said, my voice hard as granite. "I let you live. I gave you a home. I gave you food. I gave you a life. You chose to struggle because you couldn't be satisfied with enough. You wanted it all." I took a step closer to them, and now I said, leaning down so I was eye level with my daughter, "That $10 million has a new purpose. It is not for you. It is not for your debts. It is a war chest. I am going to use every single cent of it to hire the best prosecutors, the best forensic accountants, and the best private investigators in the country. I am going to make sure that you and your husband spend the rest of your natural lives in a concrete box." Vanessa began to scream. It was a raw animal sound of pure despair. She lunged at me, but the agents held her back easily. "Get them out of my house," I said to the lead agent. They dragged them out. Todd was weeping, his legs dragging on the floor. Vanessa was screaming my name, begging, cursing, bargaining, until the door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The room was quiet. Just the sound of the rain and the hum of the TV screen still frozen on Todd's face. Rajiv looked at me. He put a hand on my shoulder. "It is done, Harry," he said softly. I nodded. I felt old, older than I had ever felt, but I also felt light. The weight of the lies was gone. "Not yet," I said, turning off the TV. "We have one more stop," where Rajiv asked. "St. Jude's Hospital," I said, grabbing my coat. "I have a sister-in-law to pick up, and I think she is going to need a very expensive vacation." The silence that followed the playing of the video was heavy, a suffocating blanket of undeniable guilt. But the night was not over. The front door, which had been standing open to the rainy night, was filled once again. But this time it wasn't federal agents swarming in with tactical gear. It was a single man pushing a wheelchair. Captain Miller maneuvered the chair over the threshold, his face grim. In the chair sat a woman who looked like she had aged 10 years. In 6 months, yet her eyes burned with a clarity that sliced through the room. It was Aunt Clara. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket from the ambulance, and a bandage covered a nasty gash on her forehead, but she sat upright, her spine stiff with dignity. Vanessa, still on her knees with her hands cuffed behind her back, looked up. Her face went slack. It was the look of someone seeing a ghost, a specter rising from the grave to point an accusing finger. "Aunt Clara," Vanessa whispered the name, choking in her throat. You're alive." Clara didn't speak immediately. She just looked at her niece. She looked at the woman she had bounced on her knee as a baby, the woman she had bought prom dresses for, the woman she had trusted with her life. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the rain and Todd's ragged breathing. Then Clara motioned to Miller. He pushed her closer until she was just a few feet away from Vanessa. "Hello, Nessie," Clara said. Her voice was raspy from dehydration, but it was steady. It didn't waver. Vanessa started to cry, ugly, heaving sobs. "I'm sorry, Aunt Clara. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. We were desperate. I thought you were gone mentally. I thought you wouldn't know the difference." Clara shook her head slowly. "That is the tragedy of it, Vanessa. I wasn't gone. I was watching." Clara reached into the folds of her blanket. Her hand, shaking slightly, pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was an old crumpled letter. "6 months ago I started to forget where I put my keys," Clara said softly. "I forgot a name here and there. It scared me. So I went to my doctor. He told me it was just stress and age, not Alzheimer's. But I wanted to be sure. I wanted to see who would be there for me if things got bad. So I pretended. I faked the confusion. I faked the lost days. I wanted to see if my favorite niece would hold my hand or check my bank account." Vanessa stopped crying. She stared at her aunt, the color draining from her face as the realization hit her. "It was a test, Vanessa. And you failed it before it even started." Clara unfolded the paper. "This is a copy of my will, Vanessa. The one I wrote 5 years ago. The one I never changed." "Do you know what it says?" Vanessa shook her head, unable to speak. "It leaves everything to you," Clara said. Her voice hardened, becoming brittle and sharp. "My house, my investments, my jewelry. $3 million in assets. It was all yours. All you had to do was wait. All you had to do was be kind. All you had to do was love me." Vanessa let out a sound like a wounded animal. No, that can't be. I was going to give you the world." "Vanessa," Clara said, leaning forward in the chair, her eyes locking onto her niece's. "But you were too impatient. You were too greedy. I pretended to be confused to see how far your love went. I never expected you to choose a dog cage over a mansion." The words hung in the air, brutal and final. A dog cage over a mansion. It was the epitaph of Vanessa's life. She had traded a fortune for a felony because she couldn't be bothered to care for the woman who had already given her everything. "Take them away," I said to the agents. "I can't look at them anymore." The agents hauled Vanessa and Todd to their feet. Vanessa was catatonic, now her mind broken by the revelation that she had destroyed herself for nothing. But Todd was waking up to a different nightmare. As they dragged him toward the door, his phone, which had been sitting on the entry table where he left it, lit up. It buzzed angrily, vibrating against the wood. Todd saw it. He saw the name on the screen. It wasn't a contact. It was just a number he knew. "No," Todd screamed, thrashing against the agents. "Don't take me, not yet. I have to answer that. I have to tell them what, Todd?" I asked cold. "Tell them you don't have the money." "They'll kill me," Todd shrieked, his eyes bulging. "You don't understand. If I go to jail, I can't pay. They have guys inside. They said if I miss the Friday deadline, I'm a dead man. Please, Harry, pay them. Use your millions, save me." I walked over to the table. I looked at the phone buzzing with the incoming call from his executioners. I didn't touch it. "I am not saving you, Todd," I said. "I am an engineer. I fix things that are broken. You aren't broken. You are condemned." I nodded to the agents. They dragged him out into the rain, his screams mixing with the siren wails. He wasn't screaming about prison. He was screaming because he knew that prison wasn't a shelter. It was a hunting ground, and he was entering it with a target on his back. The door slammed shut. The house was quiet. I looked at Clara. She was weeping now, soft, silent tears of mourning for the family we had lost. I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Clara," I said. She nodded, reaching up to pat my hand. "I know, Harry, but we are still here." Yes, we were. We were battered. We were betrayed. We were older than we had any right to be, but we were standing on the wreckage and we were still here. I looked at Miller and Rajiv. "Let's get her to the hospital," I said. "And then I'm going to buy the most expensive bottle of champagne in Seattle, because tomorrow I have a lawn to mow, and this time I'm going to pay Luis enough to retire." 3 months later, the sun was shining on Seattle in a way that felt like an apology for all the rain. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and gasoline, a scent that used to remind me of chores, but now reminded me of survival. I stood on the back patio watching the Honda mower cut neat, precise lines across the green expanse of the backyard. Luis was pushing the mower. He wasn't looking at the basement vents anymore. He was focused on his work, his headphones on, bobbing his head to music I couldn't hear. He had come back the week after the raid, asking if I still needed a landscaper. I told him I didn't need a landscaper. I needed a man I could trust with the keys to my gate. I walked out onto the grass. Luis saw me coming and killed the engine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or scary. It was just peaceful. He wiped his forehead with a bandana, looking a little nervous the way he always did when I approached him unexpectedly. "Mr. Keaton," he said, pulling his headphones down around his neck. "Did I miss a spot?" "Oh." "Luis," I said. "The yard looks perfect. Better than perfect." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a white envelope. It wasn't thick, but it carried a weight that had nothing to do with paper. "I have something for you," I said, holding it out. Luis hesitated. He looked at the envelope, then at me. "Sir, you already paid me for the month. You paid me double. This isn't for the grass, Luis. Open it." He wiped his hands on his jeans and took the envelope. He opened the flap and pulled out the check. I watched his eyes scan the numbers. I saw his breath hitch. He froze, staring at the figure written in my sharp engineer's script, $50,000. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and watering. "Mr. Keaton, I can't take this. It's a mistake." "It is not a mistake," I said firmly. "The memo line says security consulting fee. Because that is what you did, son. You saw something wrong. And instead of walking away, instead of minding your own business like 99% of people would have done, you made a call. You saved 2 lives that day." He shook his head, overwhelmed. I just, I just heard crying, sir. Exactly, I said. You listened. And because you listened, I am standing here today. Take the money, Luis. Finish your degree. Buy a new truck. Do whatever you want. You earned it. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, tucking the check into his pocket, with a reverence that made my throat tight. He shook my hand, his grip firm and honest, and went back to his mower. I turned and walked back to the house. The black paint had been scraped off the basement windows. The glass was clear again, letting the light into the dark places. I walked up the steps to the wraparound porch. Sitting there in a wicker chair with a heavy knit blanket over her legs was Clara. She looked different. The gaunt, terrified ghost I had pulled through a window was gone. In her place was a woman who was healing. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob, silver and shining. The bruises had faded to memories. She was sipping Earl Grey tea and reading a thick novel, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up as I approached and smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Is the boy okay?" she asked. "He is fine," I said, sitting in the chair next to her. "He is a good kid. We need more like him." Clara closed her book. "We are lucky, Harry. We are so lucky." I picked up the glossy brochure I had left on the side table. It was a catalog for luxury catamarans. I had never been a boat person. I always preferred solid ground concrete and steel. But lately, the idea of drifting, of moving with the current, appealed to me. "What do you think of the 40-footer?" I asked, tapping the page. 3 cabins, a full kitchen. We could sail down the coast. Mexico, maybe Panama. Clara laughed, a sound that was music to my ears after the silence of the basement. "I think you get seasick in the bathtub, Harry. But I am willing to try if you are." I looked at her. We were 2 old survivors, battered by the people we had raised, scarred by the love we had given to the wrong hearts. But we were still here. Vanessa and Todd were awaiting trial in federal detention. The loan sharks had reportedly sold Todd's debt to another group inside the prison system, which meant his sentence had effectively become a life of fear. They were gone from our lives, excised like a tumor. I looked out at the lawn, at Luis finishing his work, at the sun filtering through the trees. "People always say that blood is thicker than water," I said quietly, watching the light play on the grass. "They use it as a weapon. They use it to bind you to people who hurt you. But I have learned something, Clara." "What's that?" she asked. "Sometimes blood is just something that attracts sharks," I said. "It draws the predators in." I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. But real family. Real family isn't about DNA or last names. Real family are the people who hear you crying from the basement when the rest of the world is pretending to be deaf. And those are the only people who deserve a seat at your table. We spend our lives building foundations, houses, careers, families, believing that if we sacrifice enough, we secure our future. But I learned the hard way that you cannot build a safe home on a foundation of entitlement. My daughter thought my silence was weakness, and my age was a disability. She forgot that the same hands that built this house could also dismantle it to save an innocent life. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, convince you that you are finished just because you are old. Your value isn't in what you can give them, it's in who you are. And if they can't see that, show them the door. If this story made you want to check your own basement or hug the people who actually care about you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice served cold. Tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Vanessa, or would you have turned on the floodlights just like I did?